I could do economics or make podcasts, and you could do economics or make podcasts, but you're really good at making podcasts and I'm really good at doing economics.
Yeah.
So it makes sense for you to make all the podcasts and for me to do all the economics.
I would hope so.
Kind of thing, yeah. It's kind of, and then it's gains from trade. You know, I get to be on your podcast and you get to live in a low inflation environment once we're done.
You might be asking, how does a leading global economist fit into a podcast that explores life's bounty in all its glory, from growing and eating your own food through to how to fill your life with joy? I think it's simple, really. Economic policies globally and nationally underpin so many elements of our everyday lives. The rampant inflation and high cost of living, especially as seen at the petrol pump, supermarket, or in utility bills, really bring this to life. I know in my own circle of friends and family that so many people are struggling as they try to make ends meet and put food on the table every day. It's what inspired me to start putting a spotlight on how we can all feed ourselves more cheaply, healthily, and sustainably. It has also caused me to reflect deeply on the role of joy in leading a bountiful life. Happiness comes and goes, but joy is one thing that we can control every day, whether it is the joy of a morning coffee, the joy of a daily walk, the joy of playing with our pet, or in my case, the joy of seeing my microgreens grow each day. So Paul, welcome to the Bountiful Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I must confess that I've been a secret fan of yours for a few years now. I think you have a real knack of taking really complex subjects and making them understandable and relatable for those of us that really have no training or understanding of economics.
Thanks, Shannon.
And obviously it's a privilege to have this time with you today.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
So do you have a vegetable garden?
No, I do not have a vegetable garden.
And why is that?
At this current phase in my life. Because, why not? Because I've got a lot of stuff going on in my life and it's a matter, and I am very clear about what I'm prioritizing at different points in life. And currently there isn't room for a vegetable garden, but I do look forward to having one in the future.
When we talked, a few weeks ago, you mentioned that you'll have a vegetable garden in the third phase of your life, but right now you're focused on, I guess, making New Zealand great, bringing down some costs, Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm very much focused on making, I think New Zealand has so much potential as a wonderful place to live. There's so much that's already good about our country, but the economy doesn't work particularly well. So we're not a high wage, high productivity economy. You've already talked about the cost of living being too high. We've got inflation at the moment. So my efforts are very much focused on, doing what I can, along with an amazing team at Te Pūtea Mātua, the Reserve Bank, to help to turn that around. And I think of my life in 3 phases, 30-year blocks, fingers crossed, we get to 90. So I'm in my mid-50s at the moment, and it's very much a sort of, it's a work phase at the moment. I think my third will be more about, sort of your stuff, really getting a bit closer to nature, really, and enjoying that.
And then I guess we'll talk a lot more about economics and inflation and all of that soon. But first, do you like to cook?
I do like to cook, yeah. Again, I'm not a huge cook at the moment. It's something that I enjoy when I manage to do it. We eat very well here. We are lucky enough that we are predominantly organic, and we do have, we do get good meals one way or another at the end of the day. But again, I'm looking forward to kind of expressing my creativity in the kitchen.
Yeah, and not just playing the piano.
Not just playing the piano. I love playing the piano. I think, economics is sort of, it's a science, but it's really a data-informed art, because there's a lot that we don't know about it. The data's not that great. So the data and sort of models get you so far, but then from getting from there to sort of, in the context of monetary policy, what are we going to do with the OCR? There's sort of a wisdom there that you need, which it's not right to call it an art, but it's not entirely just like a science. It's not like physics sort of thing. So I find the piano, after a hard day of economics, to come home and play the piano, it sort of reorientates my brain quite nicely. I find it deeply restorative at the end of a hard day.
So can you tell me how you see the world?
That's a big question. Yeah. How do I see the world? Well, I mean, which lens should I answer that with? I mean, economics is the one that comes to mind because it's a Wednesday morning, so we're thinking about economics. And the world is in a fairly delicate place at the moment. So globally, this epidemic of inflation is affecting most countries on the planet. We've all shared the common experience of the pandemic. Geopolitical tensions are ratcheting up around the place. So the world to me feels a bit scary really, and a bit sort of dangerous. And I think there's lots of uncertainty, and I think we need to pick our way carefully into the future, given what's happening globally. Having said all that, there's no place I would rather be than here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I think we've got, I think if we play our cards right, I think the world is throwing up a whole heap of challenges, but also opportunities for us as a sort of small, remote economy.
Very far away place.
Yeah, far away place, which on the one hand is excellent given what's going down in the world, but that sort of distance, it costs us in terms of how our economy functions. So economists, we talk about economic geography, how kind of economics and geography interacts. And I think over New Zealand's economic history, our economic geography has really been a handbrake for this economy in ways, some ways that we're understanding, we're getting a good understanding of, but in other ways that we're still a bit unclear of. Like, having said all that, I don't think economic geography is destiny. So I think there really is an opportunity. Like for the best part of a decade, I've been really pushing the idea of a digitally connected New Zealand economy. And I think if we can really digitize the economy, not just by having a computer and going, sweet, we're done, but by truly embracing e-commerce, it'll bring us closer to international markets. Like, geography becomes less of a constraint, I guess, in the online world compared to the physical world.
In one of my old jobs, we helped companies expand into the US market. And one of the things we used to talk about was like the tyranny of distance. Yeah. Like, we need to close the gap between us and the world, not necessarily by like miles flown, but through like connectivity and also like knowledge capital, I guess, like things we can learn from the world, we can apply in New Zealand.
Absolutely. Like, I think New Zealand, we've kind of got this view, this sort of image of ourselves as this little trading nation, down here in the South Pacific. But if you look at the data, for a small economy, we're actually not that well connected globally. So the work of NZTE is fundamental, I think, all of that sort of stuff. And it's not just about selling more exports globally. It's also about sort of setting up, if we connected to the world, then all the good ideas, that's the other thing about the world. It's an amazing place, and there's people and businesses out there doing incredible things, and it's incredibly naturally innovative and responding to the challenges that we have. And if we can plug ourselves into all of that, if we can connect into all of that, then those connections, they sort of serve as a sort of vector for technological transmission into the New Zealand economy. So we're learning from what's going on at the kind of forefront, the frontier of the global economy. And I think there's lots of scope for us to improve that. I don't think it happens naturally for us here.
Are there any systemic things we need to do in New Zealand, or any training things we would need to do? Because it's fine for that to get here, but then are we actually ready to embrace it?
That's right. Like, that's the other huge thing. It's all very well to say, oh, here's a good idea, or here's a computer, like, off you go. It'll make everything better, off you go. But as businesses and as an economy, we really need to build the capacity to absorb those new technologies, those better ways of doing things. So education, skills is fundamental. My kind of vision for the future of this country, we need people that are strong in the digital realm, that have the right sort of skills to embrace that technology. So, transforming the New Zealand economy, it's a kind of low wage, low productivity economy. Sort of, we grow our economy by throwing more people at it. We're very labor intensive. And to transform that into an economy that's driven more by technology, more by sort of doing things better rather than just sort of doing the same thing more, That's a huge challenge that, we talked about skills, but also the way we do innovation, the way we engage with the world. I think getting the whole package right across a whole range of facets is what's required to really pull it together. You can't sort of tinker at the margin, or you can't sort of just fix one thing and expect it to be a game changer when other things need attention as well. So it's a huge challenge.
Lots to talk about there. Do you think, just one more thing on that, I guess for now, is do you think obviously I've worked in tech for a number of years, but we're sort of at the forefront and there's not that many of us. Do you think that the tech sector has more of a role to play in sort of disseminating some of the skills?
Absolutely.
Or is it someone else's job?
I don't think that's just on the tech sector. I sort of think of the tech sector. In New Zealand, we've got a burgeoning tech sector. It's really great. It's exciting. There's some excellent companies in that space. I sort of think of that as the frontier of New Zealand business in lots of ways. And then I think of a sort of distribution of performance. So we've got a little bit of our economy here that's going well. But when I say digitise the economy, I'm also talking about all of those more lagging businesses, just regular New Zealand businesses just doing their thing. And I think if that, the great sort of mass of business in New Zealand were to successfully embrace e-commerce, and then they're sort of catching up towards that frontier, then that would be a game changer in terms of lifting our performance. So it's not just about sort of looking after those frontier firms and ensuring that they've got what they need to really do the business globally, but it is about how do you sort of diffuse those ideas and that sort of technology to the great mass of New Zealand businesses, and many of which are very small because our markets are very small. We're a huge country geographically, size of Japan, size of California, with a very small population, 5 million and something people here, growing rapidly at the moment, growing at 2.5% at the moment. But it's it's a challenge. We've been dealt a challenge, and it's great where we've got to, I think, as a developed country down here, but I think the potential for us to kick on and go further
it's huge.
It's huge, yeah, and exciting.
How do you see yourself?
Me?
Yep. Ask the hard ones first.
How do I see myself? I mean, blessed, very fortunate. I do gratitude every day. I pinch myself every day that I'm the chief economist at the Reserve Bank, a few times a day. Usually I'm I can't believe I'm involved in this conversation. So, yeah, I'm really grateful for all of that. I think I've got a role to play. I think I can be. I've always just wanted to have impact. I've always just wanted to be able to, get to that third of life and look back and go, we got some good stuff done. We improved, well-being. We improved prosperity for a bunch of New Zealanders. I think I love our country. I just think it's an amazing place. I'm grateful to be born here. So, yeah. And I'm a dad, and I'm a partner to Anne-Marie, and I like community. I like art. I like to be well-rounded, and I just love people, really.
What does it mean to you to have a bountiful life?
A bountiful life is a really interesting. This is why I've been attracted to your stuff, because I like, I've spent the last 20 years more or less working on productivity. So productivity, is kind of a dry sounding word. It's not the kind of sexiest word in the English language. It kind of sounds like something a little bit unpleasant that is done to you. But it's not. It's productivity is about getting more, or in a narrow kind of economic sense, we think about it as getting more value add from each hour in the job. So if you're more productive, you're creating more from an hour of work. But I have a really broad definition of productivity. I think the job of the economy is to deliver well-being to the people within sustainability, within the constraints of the planet, sort of thing. And so that's a very broad notion of productivity, which is getting very close to that notion of a bountiful life. We have poverty in this country. We have hardship in this country, and I fully know that's not my life for whatever reason. I'm not close to that, but I also know that you don't have to go far from here, downtown Wellington, to really find communities that are, where food on the table is a real issue. And I don't think that's acceptable. And I don't think we need to, and I think we can do better as a country. So on the one hand, a bountiful life is kind of no poverty and all of that. I think it's also, like for me, another thing I really, I'm talking about me, is I really love connection to nature, which I think is where you're coming from. And I think New Zealand gives us great opportunities in that place. I was talking about a huge mountainous country with not many people on it. In a way, that's big ups, because it allows it, again, you don't have to go far from here to be like feel like you're in the bush going tramping, So that's that. Yeah, like having enough so that you don't have unmet needs, so that you can sort of live with with dignity and pride and mana. I think that's all really important. And being close to nature is the second element of what I consider to be a bountiful life.
I really like that. I hadn't really thought about living a bountiful life is really living your best life with the elements and what is enough for you, which I think if we redefine success as enoughness. I really like that, but I haven't necessarily thought about the productivity of the bounty, which is with each area of your life, you actually want to make each area more productive in whatever the treasures are that you've decided make up your bountiful life, which I actually really like that, because you can almost take each area and go, how do I make, maybe my relationship more productive in a really holistic sense to make it more bountiful, or the same with your work or health. I think that's really cool.
That's right. And productivity sounds even drier when you're applying it to a relationship. But yeah, it's like well-being. How can I kind of, advance my kind of, get along my path and find satisfaction and peace, or, whatever your thing is, within each of those facets.
What advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
I've had such a great, as I said, mid-50s, and the last 30 years have been just a blast. We've lived internationally, worked for some of the best economists globally on a whole bunch of interesting countries. I still am really into developmental economics, so I've been able to work on China and India, among other countries, Russia for a bit, worked at the OECD in Paris. So it's gone pretty well. So I wouldn't try and, there's nothing I feel that I need to correct. I think some things that I've really learnt now that would have been useful to learn earlier is just about, being yourself. Like at the Reserve Bank, we've got this, or in the economics department, this big focus on just bring your full self to work. There's no difference. You don't leave a bit of you behind when you walk through the door. So authenticity is really important for me. And I think authenticity it works for everybody. If we can really be genuine and really, see each other, we get to a better place, more quickly. It sort of helps with all that well-being stuff and connection. But it actually also helps in terms of a workplace, really firing, because everybody's got each other's back. There's a lot of care in the environment, and it really kind of works. So I'd probably push that authenticity. I think, as a 20-something-year-old or a teenager, you're a little unsure of yourself because you're just getting to meet yourself and know yourself anyway. So it makes sense that that's a sort of process of discovery. But yeah, I would just encourage myself to push that along, be authentic.
On this note, and there's a weird question, or it's not even really a question, but I sort of wonder, how there's stereotypes, I don't know, we seem to naturally stereotype people. And so we're at your house today, and I don't know what I expected, but, house is filled with art, and, I think maybe people have a conception that people that do policy or monetary policy or economists are kind of boring and sit in a room, in a windowless room in a suit and tie, just staring out at the beehive or something in Wellington. And I guess the crux of it is people are actually just people regardless of what they do for a job, right?
Exactly. That's the authenticity thing. Yeah. I do have a suit and tie, and I do look out over the beehive from my office, or from my desk, I should say, in the economics department. But yeah, I guess economics can feel a little dry, and I think the profession has kind of brought that on itself a bit. There's a big focus on sort of rationality, a rational agent that's kind of optimizing everything as they go through life. And that's been the basis for a lot of economic insights. And you kind of look at that and go, it's just obviously not true. It's obviously not a true. It's like assume this, assume that, assume we don't live on planet Earth, assume everything away. And then, this happens. And you kind of go, that's mildly interesting as a sort of intellectual jigsaw puzzle. But if it's not about the world, if it's separating the profession from what's actually going on in the world, then I think it sort of casts us in a fairly boring light, and not particularly useful or even interesting light. But I think the profession has moved a lot over the last couple of decades. Big data has really been a revelation in economics. So we're less about sort of theoretical models based on unrealistic assumptions, and more about using big data to understand how communities work, how communities function. So the lens of economics is becoming much more interesting to look through at what's going on around us.
What would you say, have you had any experiences like in childhood or otherwise that have shaped who you are today and like what you do for a living? I grew up in Invercargill, like in the deep south, which is full of, my experience, full of wonderful people that are close to nature and, big skies and really genuine, authentic people. With a hard edge to it as well. Like it was a bit, Invercargill in the 80s was not just, it was quite full on at some times. But also we had Central Otago was just there when Queenstown was just this tiny little alpine village, I'm kind of thinking 70s and 80s with just some sort of loose units from Invercargill getting up to mischief. And it was super fun. Like I really enjoyed it and really got a great group of people around me from an early stage, who are still there now. I've really had that longevity of relationships, which has totally shaped me. They're like family to me, my close people. In terms of me as an economist, I sort of did it from fourth form back in the day because it was easy, and it kind of just felt like a crazy thing to do. And then in the mid 80s, when Rob Muldoon was on the rampage and we had inflation, and I remember, we had a price and wage freeze for a year, I think. And I remember him coming on the news and going, as from tomorrow, it's no one can put up their price. No one can put up their wage. Like rents can't go up as of midnight tonight. And I thought, that's pretty, it sort of really hooked my imagination. And I thought, that's super interesting. Like why? Why is that happening, and what's the significance of that? And that was kind of the beginning of like true sort of economic thought stream for me. The beginning of economics becoming more than an intellectual crossword puzzle to being about the real world. And that's that shaped my career my kind of career aspirations. Although I didn't know it at the time. I did an undergrad, and then I sort of travelled the world for a good few years, and I went back in my late 20s getting serious about becoming an economist and did a master's at Victoria. So what do economists actually do?
I used to kind of think of ourselves as glorified storytellers. Like I think narrative is really important, and I think we've got tools that allow us to tell really good stories. And when I say stories, not fiction. They're not all fiction. There's a bit of fiction in there for sure. But stories that resonate and are close to people's lived experience, which is why we get traction. The more we can, I kind of think, I think people live in the economy. We're all shaped by economic forces, so we all understand economics to some, in some way. And I think the challenge, your very kind words opening. I think, one thing I've been able to do is sort of put economics in a frame that people relate to because it's about their lives. It's about what happens to them. So, that's kind of one of my superpowers, I guess.
And what would you say the pros and cons of your job has been over the last sort of 3 years?
Like there's different kinds of economists. So there's like pointy-headed ones that have got models and have got heaps of data that do research and really unpick interesting things like that. There's people that try and use frameworks to project into the future to let us know what we should do today to make the future better. So there's a heap of different economists. But for me, where I am now as the chief economist, I think of myself as sort of conducting an orchestra, really making sure that all those bits, all those different groups of people are sort of, where's our North Star? Like, where are we heading and why, and just getting collaboration going. I kind of see my job as making space for amazing people to do their thing. And yeah.
And as part of that, at like a functional level, you kind of go, right, we've got this problem in the economy. Let's go get the data and the research to figure out what monetary policy or what policy or reform we can do in order to fix the problem. And then you're conducting the right people that have the right experience in your department to figure it out with you. Yeah,
that's right. And then like that, then the economics department, we lobbed that to what's called a monetary policy committee. There's 7 of us on that committee, including me. So 4 people internal to the Reserve Bank and 3 external people. And that committee, usually by consensus, makes a decision on what we should be doing with interest rates. So that's kind of that's, in terms of the economics department, that's our sort of peak contribution, is what we should be doing with interest rates. But to get that right, you really need to understand what's going on in the economy in a really deep kind of way.
Should we maybe talk about like what's going on in the world a little bit, and then start looking at like New Zealand and some of the challenges we've faced here, and then the types of like why we have inflation and what's going on? Yep. So what's kind of going on in the world that's shaping us at the moment? Yeah,
like we're very exposed to what's going on in the world. So what's going on in the world really matters for us here in New Zealand. So, in terms of how we got inflation, like essentially we and this is a global story because we had the pandemic. It was a real global experience that we all went through. Luckily we had technology, so many of us could work from home. So it didn't completely obliterate the global economy, but it definitely was a huge curveball that changed it massively. And so we all, governments supported people during that time who couldn't work or whatever. So incomes remained high over the pandemic. So demand in the economy remained strong, particularly for goods, things that could be bought online and delivered. But at the same time, we were having all these problems with global supply chains. It was kind of kicked off by someone trying to drive a ship up the Panama Canal sideways, which really didn't work. And it really exposed the fragilities in global supply chain. So, a lot of economics is quite simple. Like demand was strong, supply was weak, so inflation went up. And then we came out of lockdown, and everyone's like, oh, I haven't been out for dinner for ages. I haven't been on holiday somewhere else for ages. So demand for services really picked up then in the context of a services industry. So this is when, prior to that, services was obviously hard hit over the pandemic. So tourism, international education, in-person, face-to-face retail, all of that was massively decimated over that period. And then we come out of lockdown, and then that's what everybody wants to do in the context of a services sector that's sort of been in hibernation. So again, you got supply, demand greater than supply. So we got a surge of inflation coming at us through the services side of the economy. And then Russia invaded, or during that period, Russia invaded Ukraine, which really disrupted global energy markets, global food markets. So we had inflation come at us from that as well. So we've essentially, and then we had, we had severe weather events earlier this year, which really, screwed with our food production capability. I think a kilo of kumara is still incredibly expensive. Yeah, but we're getting through that. But it was just kind of one thing after another led to inflation at the time. And monetary policy was very stimulatory as COVID was sort of hitting, and fiscal policy was very stimulatory as well. So there was the demand side of our economy was being stimulated by those things. So which is part of the reason why inflation got out of the box. But that's kind of looking at it with the benefit of hindsight, which is always a lot easier than at the time.
For the people in New Zealand that maybe don't quite understand, can you explain, so the cyclone we had recently where the roads were either washed away or blocked, a lot of our growers are in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Can you explain, at a sort of basic or rudimentary level, what does that actually mean for getting like food to the supermarket, food on our table? Is it just that prices go up because, I don't know, there's less available?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a supply side, there's a hit to the supply side. So, crops were decimated around in different bits of the East Coast in particular, but in other parts of the country as well. So it's just simply a supply shock. And it's the kind of thing, it's going to keep happening with climate change. We're going to get impacted by severe weather events more and more going forward compared to the past. So, for us as a central bank, it's something, we really need to understand the impacts of a negative supply shock like that. So it's kind of like the price. It operates as a rationing mechanism. Everybody wants a kilo of kumara, but we don't have as many kilos of kumara as we had previously. So how do you decide, who gets? How do you kind of equal that? And we do it through a price mechanism.
Is there a future we need to move towards where we become a little bit more resilient to those sort of price shocks? And is there anything that people can do?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Resilience is a real key factor at the moment. Getting back to the global economy, a lot of trade patterns are changing. Foreign direct investment around the globe is changing. Businesses, encouraged by some governments, are sort of nearshoring. So instead of having a production facility in China, for example, if you're a US business, a lot of US businesses are bringing that closer to home. So they'll put it in, Mexico or Canada or Vietnam, or even onshoring, like just bringing it back to the US in this example. And the reason they're doing that is just to try and make those supply chains more resilient because of geopolitical tensions. The kind of level of trust, I guess, across different countries is in a hole at the moment. So that's one kind of form of resilience. And I think climate change, obviously, there's mitigation. How do we kind of stick with 1.5 as the maximum increase in global temperatures, which looks to be in risk, just following the COP news at the moment. But adaptation is the other thing, because it's happening. It's happening now. It's happening to us. So how do we adapt ourselves to live through that environment? And greater resilience is a big part of that. I mean, having a veggie garden, that's resilience. What happens if domestic supply chains break down and we can't get potatoes from Pukekohe down to Cromwell, for example? For you, it doesn't matter because you can just go and dig them up out of the garden. So that's resilience. That
was one of the reasons why I wanted to have a veggie garden. Like, we live rurally, and like the other day, power went out. There was a tree blocking the road. Couldn't get in or out unless you had 4-wheel drive. Like, lucky we had a 4-wheel drive, so we could technically drive anywhere, I guess. Yeah. But I had food from the veggie garden, and so that was I'm not a doomsdayer, but there is a certain nice thing about having your own supply of certain things so that you're actually fine in an emergency.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm not a doomsdayer either. I think we are going to get through climate change. I think, there's a lot for us to it's a fundamental shift when I think of what does the world look like on the other side of the climate crisis. It's a very different place to how we live today. But I sort of have a bit of belief in us as humanity that I think we can shoot that gap, and I think we can get there. I think the will is strong. So I don't see having a veggie garden as kind of giving up on humanity or anything like that. It's just it's resilience to help us sort of get through this.
So how one of the things with the podcast that I kind of wanted to talk to people about and talk about with people like yourself is food economics. So how do you as an economist think about the economics of food, feeding a nation, all that sort of good stuff?
Yeah. We actually get monthly data on food prices, which is great. And it's a big part of the consumer price index, the sort of inflation index that we use, that we target with monetary policy. And it's kind of the bit that I really pay attention. I pay attention to everything, but I'm very focused on food prices. And I'm also very focused on unemployment, because I think those are two aspects of the economy that are very close to everybody's lives. So I think, food is interesting. Like it's never just globally, it's never that there's a lack of food. A famine is not caused by the fact of there not being enough food in the world to feed all the people. It's all about distribution. The food isn't in the right place at the right time, usually from some ridiculous policy failure somewhere along the way. So yeah, that's kind of globally how I think of it. It was interesting growing up in Invercargill in the 80s. We didn't have broccoli or anything like that. It kind of hadn't been invented for us down there at that time. So I've really enjoyed watching how food markets have evolved over that time. Yeah, even just walking through the supermarket, through the dairy aisle, which was pretty austere kind of place back in the day, and now there's just so many products around. So food, it's fundamental. It's you are what you eat kind of thing. I think there's wisdom in that. So absolutely. Get it right, encourage innovation. It's cool. It's great.
What do you think most people don't understand about food and inflation?
I don't know really. Like I think Cyclone Gabrielle was a really good sort of crash course for us in terms of food economics and inflation. So as it was raining, as it was flooding, there was that negative supply shock. So prices for food started to go up. And then, we're starting to see food prices come down in New Zealand. So it's been food price inflation has been super strong over the last few years. And food prices globally have come down a lot more quickly than what they have in New Zealand. So and part of the reason for that was because of the cyclone. So it's sort of because that was going on domestically here, it kind of got in the way of that sort of transmission of lower food prices into New Zealand. So I think, often you hear people say, well, we export some of the best food in the world, but it's still super expensive here. Thinking of food markets as being influenced by what's going on internationally. I don't know what people don't know about food markets.
You just raised a really good point. So why can I buy a beautiful green kiwi fruit in Vietnam for cheaper than I can buy a kiwi fruit in New Zealand?
Yeah. Well, can you? Have you been to Vietnam and bought a beautiful green kiwi fruit lately? That's to the extent that that's true, and I don't doubt you. I think that's totally and you hear people saying the same thing about a leg of lamb in the UK being cheaper than it is here. Yeah, I think part of the reason for that is it's a global market. So we are exposed to international food prices here, but you would think the kind of cost of getting that kiwi fruit from here to Vietnam, or the bit of lamb from here to Canada or the UK would mean it should be more expensive there. So then you look at things, what's going on in our domestic economy here, and I think, again, getting back to our economic geography, we're small, and two of the fundamental drivers of productivity is big companies tend to be more productive, so scale really matters, and competition can also be important. But here, because our markets tend to be so small, including our supermarket market, there's a duopoly there. So I just theoretically, and I haven't looked at this, although the Commerce Commission has, the productivity of that part of our economy isn't as good as it may be elsewhere, because there's a lack of kind of new entrants and all that sort of stuff into there. And this is a problem across a lot of markets in New Zealand. We don't really have markets where there's big players competing hard out with each other to lift productivity. And when you lift productivity like that, so we're getting more value for each hour at work, that can either flow into higher wages, or it can flow into a better return on capital for investors, or it can flow into cheaper prices for consumers. So that's the link into prices.
It's kind of, I guess it would be like saying, so say you've got a farmer that has lamb, they could sell all of their lamb, obviously at a cheaper price to a UK supermarket or brand, but at a scale that they would get more money than having to shop around 4 or 5 different suppliers in New Zealand for a different price point. So I guess for them, they're like, well, I might as well just go scale and surety of.
Yeah, that's it's easily. I'm not entirely sure how. I think a lot of, I think an issue with farmers and growers here is the distance from the farm to somebody's plate in the UK is a long way. And I think the structure of industries means that sort of price signals from there don't always make it back to the farmers. So they just, sell their lamb or produce or whatever to, to an intermediary who does all of that sort of follow-up sort of stuff. So for the farmer, I guess it's quite an easy decision. And, sure, there'd be a few more boutique farmers and growers that supply local kind of more niche markets if they felt so inclined. But yeah, it's just the kind of vagaries of the market. I do, just kind of riffing on that, like I do think, and getting like climate change, I think New Zealand, we have the potential to produce product that is climate neutral from a greenhouse gas perspective, or even climate friendly. And I think if we pulled that off, then we're producing a premium product that does get a premium price on global markets. But the challenge is, people are prepared to pay more for products like that. We know that from surveys. 80% of Americans will pay more for a product that's sustainably grown than one that isn't. But how do you get those price signals out of that distant market to really influencing what farmers and growers are doing on the farm?
A classic of that, so my neighbour Mike has a carbon zero petrol.
Mike Casey, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but then he has the challenge of he's like, well, in order for that to happen, I have to get all the cherries off the trees. Then I have to get them logistically where they are. But then I only want to do that with electric vehicles or electric kind of freight or logistics. Yeah. And so really at the moment, until technology sort of catches up, he's limited to the New Zealand market in a way.
Yep. Yeah. Well, until the whole supply chain goes electric. So, or boats, he probably flies them out, but yeah, exactly. Like the whole supply chain needs to be decarbonised to kind of turn up with a product like that. But Mike's doing great stuff. I love his cherries and prepared to pay more just for the fact that, no fossil fuels was burnt in the creation of this amazing piece of fruit.
So I noticed at the moment I'm eating a lot of pumpkin from Tonga. Like Tonga's a tiny island nation. Like why is pumpkin from Tonga ending up in supermarkets in Cromwell? Like what is going on there?
Yeah. I wouldn't have a clue. Sorry, I don't know. I haven't been to Tonga for a while. I mean, they must just have a heap of pumpkins there at the moment. And there must be, it's like comparative advantage. It's kind of, it must make sense for them to grow pumpkins and send it to us here, and we send them money or something else in return.
And what does comparative advantage mean?
Comparative advantage, it's sort of, I could do economics or make podcasts, and you could do economics or make podcasts, but you're really good at making podcasts and I'm really good at doing economics. So it makes sense for you to make all the podcasts and for me to do all the economics.
I would hope so.
Kind of thing, yeah. It's kind of, and then it's gains from trade. I get to be on your podcast and you get to live in a low inflation environment once we're done.
Hopefully. And then the secondary one for this is like, I often hear like with myself and also my family and friends, like, why is kumara, like $16, $18 a kilo, but then I can buy a bag of frozen kumara for like $4, $3. Like what is going on there?
Yeah. Like I think there's still a hangover from Cyclone Gabrielle in the kumara market. So, not only was a lot of produce wiped out at the time, but also seed kumara and the like. So it's taken a while for supply to recover. But in terms of the difference between frozen and fresh, it's just a matter of shelf life. Like fresh is perishable. So logistically, it's much more challenging to get it to you, while it's still in pristine condition, and there's costs associated with that. So you pay the price.
And then a frozen good is looked at as a commodity because it's not a perishable, like in the same way.
Yeah, it behaves more like a commodity. It behaves more like a sack of milk powder kind of thing.
Yeah, great. I think that's not obvious, which is awesome. Let's talk a little bit about the link between prosperity and economics or well-being, like economics and well-being.
Yeah, so I think economists have been historically quite focused on GDP, which is totally legitimate. It's an important economic indicator, the sort of output of an economy. It's good to know about, but it's only sort of recently that we've really sort of asked, well, why do we want higher incomes? Like, what's the benefit of that? Instead of being a sort of thing that we're pursuing in its own right, higher incomes, a more productive economy are a means to an end. And that end is greater well-being, less financial stress and hardship, less poverty. And there's lots of studies around on that, like higher incomes do improve well-being to a certain level. And then it all just gets a bit ridiculous. And there's a sort of marginal positive effect of an extra 10 grand is nothing kind of thing. But I would argue that many New Zealanders are still on that upward sloping bit of the curve where more money would be beneficial for well-being and prosperity.
Yeah, awesome. Let's change gears a little bit. What's your hope you talked about New Zealand not necessarily meeting its potential. How do we meet our potential? Like, what are some of the things that you think we need to fix, or what do we need to do in order to start actually performing at the level that we should be?
Yeah. That's sort of about economic transformation. I guess in my current role, the first thing I should say is get inflation back down to target, which we're very focused on at the moment. So target 1% to 3%, focus on the midpoint at 2%. We're on track to deliver that. Monetary policy is working, is doing. But that's sort of about the cycle. And your question was about how do we kind of lift the trend performance of the New Zealand economy. So again, that's getting into things like as our education system, providing New Zealanders with the skills they need to really flourish. Are we connected globally in ways that are allowing new ideas and better ways of doing things to really flow into the economy? Are we funding innovation, in ways that make sense and that really sort of help us unlock gnarly issues that are relevant to what we can do here in the country? For me, I think a lot of it is about, we can't do everything. We're only a very small place. So where is it that we can really have impact globally? And I do think that's, digital. I do games. There's heaps of things that make sense to operate out of New Zealand. We're never going to assemble cars or build TVs because they're heavy and we're a long way away from everywhere. So I really like that weightless kind of stuff. And I do think we need to sort of focus on areas that have the potential to transform the economy. And your standard economic response to that is you can't pick winners. Don't pick winners. And I kind of go, well, fair enough, don't pick winners. But I think of that as individual firms. And I do think we can pick a few races where we've got a chance of getting to that global performance frontier.
When we've been talking in the past, one of the things that we're kind of talking about is that, one, we probably need more vision. Like we need a North Star as a nation, I think, to get better. And that's longer than 3-year cycles because you can't do too much in that. We're not going to go down that road. What I want to get to is...
Although I do have a view, absolutely.
I think it would be useful if you explain the difference between government failure and market failure, because I think in the past there's been a few things that have been tried once. And as we would say in the startup sector, like 99% of startups fail, 1% succeed. And I think we have this fear of trying things if it fails once, whereas I feel like we kind of need to get over that so we can actually start being more innovative, having more vision, and then getting the nation kind of, pushing the boat out a little.
Yeah, like I really like that North Star sort of language, like where are we going and why, and does it, how come that makes sense for us? How come that is that North Star? I think like economics, the sort of Washington consensus, the idea there was essentially small governments, like get the government out of the way and allow the private sector to do its thing. And, there's a wisdom in that. I think that has delivered economic performance improvements globally. But again, I think in a small economy like ours, building an industry, it is a partnership, whether we like it or not, between government and the private sector. And I think, a good example of that is space. Rocket Lab kind of came out of nowhere and wouldn't have got anywhere without the government sort of saying, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. We're a strategically interesting part of the world for flinging up satellites. So they, next minute we had a space agency and we had no sort of regulation in that space to start with, pun intended. So they came up, with something that worked really well. And now, we've got over 300 sort of firms operating in that space. So I think building industries is a partnership. So sometimes, I'm sort of there's been a revival in industry policy globally, and economists, we're a bit nervous about it because we've seen government failure in the past, and there's lots of examples of government failure in the past. But I also think, we've gotten better at doing that sort of thing, and what are the relative roles and how does sort of regulatory frameworks, impinge on private sector behaviour. So I think there has been learning. And I totally take your point. I mean, politicians hate anything to fail. So that kind of startup idea of fast fail, let's give it a crack, and if it doesn't work, we'll move on to something else. It doesn't necessarily translate into the political realm, but it should. I think we should be more innovative in the public policy space, and really focused on, okay, what's working, what isn't, and if it isn't, we change it or we get rid of it and we move on. So I like that kind of innovative mindset, and I think there's a place for it in the public policy space.
How would you say you've nurtured your mind over the years, or soul? Yeah,
like I meditate like for an hour a day when I've got the time, probably 4 days a week, and I find that really beneficial. It really balances me out. Like stress, I'm in a stressful, but I just let it wash over me. Like I like being well-rounded. I like social connection. I like art. I like music, and I think that's all about building. As I age into someone that I like.
Yep.
So yeah.
Awesome. Can you tell me about a time in your life that wasn't so bountiful and perhaps how you fixed it?
I've had a dream run, and I fully acknowledge that. But I've had times, I've done a lot of traveling, and I've had times where I'm lonely and afraid and in a dank kind of place. And I've always, I learned through that everything moves towards its end. Like, this time will change, and a bit of patience sometimes is required to help sort of get through a moment like that.
I used to practice this thing where I would be like, just go to sleep and wake up, and tomorrow's a new day. You just actually need to get to the new day. Yeah. And I think that sort of mindset really, in darker times, maybe calmed me down a little, because you're like, actually, don't focus on it now. It's probably better tomorrow. Yeah. And nothing good happens at 3 a.m, right? So just don't even try to talk about anything or do anything at 3 a.m.
It's kind of that Buddhist idea. Everything is temporary, including, this current state.
Quick fire questions.
All right, let's go.
Let's go. What, in your opinion, is the most underrated fruit or vegetable?
Broccoli.
Because you didn't have it down south.
Maybe.
As long as it's not mushy, that's my thing.
Yeah, no, it has to be cooked kind of al dente.
What's your favourite cocktail if you drink?
I'm not a huge drinker these days, but I would go-to cocktail would be a margarita.
Perfect. Worst meal that your parents made you eat?
Overcooked, soggy vegetables. Although in Invercargill, land of blue cod, oysters and crayfish, we ate well.
Delicious. Most spontaneous thing you've ever done? I think setting up a band in your garage. That's pretty spontaneous.
Possibly, yep. I'll get an idea, but it doesn't feel spontaneous to me, because it just feels like, okay, that's the thing, that's the way, that's the direction, let's go. And it can happen quite quickly. But you're setting up a band room in the garage just happened like that. It was great.
Biggest challenge you've had to overcome?
Probably depression. I used to get a bit of depression, and just getting on top of that, it really weighed me down, and it really rocked my faith in myself, and it made me think that that my view of the world wasn't, that it was, it was like the ground opening up and getting through that. Very challenging and very rewarding to get out the other side of it.
Yeah, I understand that. What word describes your life?
Meaningful.
Love that. And what are you most proud of?
I'm proud of everything I create. I'm proud of my creativity.
The final few questions are, for people just starting out with economics, what's your one piece of advice for them?
Keep going. We need more economists in New Zealand. We've got a tricky little economy. It's quite unique in lots of ways, and understanding it and regulating it and governing it appropriately will really help with that transition. So the potential for those young economists is huge. Keep going.
Is there anything economics-wise you don't think we've talked about?
Yeah, heaps.
Anything?
That would take a week. No, I reckon we've really covered it. The productivity mixed with the inflation stuff is really good.
Right. Obviously, New Zealand and housing is a sore point for a lot of people. Like, what's going on with housing? And
Like, it's a pretty interesting point. Like Bernard Hickey describes New Zealand economy as a housing market with a few other bits tacked on. And I think it's true that housing has really, like historically, we've grown our economy by trading houses amongst ourselves at ever increasing prices and pretending that we're creating prosperity. And it worked, like, for a while. And now your average house is not far south of $1 million. People's kids are growing up and they're dawning, oh man, how are they going to get their house? You know, so how do we change the role of, you know, housing is always going to be, there's always going to be landlords, there's always going to be a market there, and if that's working fairly and everybody's happy, that's great. But I do think we need to diversify our investment kind of horizons to other spaces.
is that sort of a bit of a business challenge and then an education challenge where there's like $1 trillion or something in the housing market in New Zealand, where the stock market's like a tenth of that or whatnot. And so we almost need more business and innovation and more leadership capacity in order to start like actually addressing that problem fairly.
Absolutely. So the equity market here is very, very small compared to the size of our economy relative to other countries. So as we like key bit of building a more productive economy is really firing up that business sector to get it really singing and really making the most of what we've got here and kind of, selling it to the world in some ways. And that we're talking about food, like provenance. This thing I'm eating has come from New Zealand. Wow. It's climate neutral, climate positive. Wow, that's amazing. I can taste it. I can feel it. I'll pay for that.
Final thing is just like, what is the dream for you?
I'm living it. This is it. Reality is the dream. Yeah. Like I do, I see my life evolving from here, but I feel very comfortable and confident with where it's going. And it's not like I'm really looking forward to that because I need to be happy and content with the here and now. It's just something that's out there and will sort of naturally run its course as I get older.
Amazing. Thank you, Paul, for sharing your thoughts and perspective with the Bountiful Podcast. It's wonderful to have an expert break down some of the complex topics in a way that we are able to understand, because economics really does impact us all in a lot more ways than we actually see in our day-to-day. For our audience eager to see more of Paul's work, I'll include some of his links in the show notes. And if you've found today's episode inspiring, don't forget to follow or subscribe to us for more engaging conversations. We've got so many more amazing guests in the season that we'll have delightful chats and conversations with that you won't want to miss. We're on a mission to explore in all ways possible what it means to live a bountiful life. Thank you, and thank you, Paul.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sian. Really enjoyed the chat.